John came in and said, "Hey guys, I'm leaving the group."
Right, he was with Yoko.
He'd found Yoko and John.
After 50 solid years, the Beatles are still regarded as the original rock stars. Do you want to find out the reasons behind that? Then hop along with us on this dedicated channel. Make sure to like the video, hit subscribe and that bell notification as we tackle all things Beatles with new videos every week. The Beatles were an English rock band consisting of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Ringo Starr from August 1962 to September 1969. Their breakup was a cumulative process attributed to numerous factors, such as the strain of the Beatlemania phenomenon, the death of manager Brian Epstein in 1967, McCartney's dominating role, Lennon's heroin use and his relationship with Yoko Ono, Harrison's prolific songwriting output, the floundering of Apple Corps and the Get Back project, later Let It Be 1970, and managerial disputes. During the second half of the Beatles' career, the members began to assert individual artistic agendas. Their disunity became most evident on The Beatles, also known as the White Album, 1968, and quarrels and disharmony over musical matters soon permeated their business discussions. Starr and Harrison each briefly quit the group during the White Album and Get Back sessions respectively. Starting in 1969, the group split into two camps regarding who should handle their business affairs. McCartney lobbied for entertainment lawyers Lee and John Eastman, but was outvoted by his bandmates in favour of businessman Alan Klein. The final time that the four members recorded together collectively was the session for Abbey Road's closing track The End on 18 August 1969. Lennon privately informed his bandmates that he was leaving the Beatles on 20th September, although it was unclear to the other members whether his departure was permanent. On 10 April 1970, McCartney issued a press release that stated he was no longer working with the group, which sparked a widespread media reaction and worsened the tensions between him and his bandmates. Legal disputes continued long after his announcement, and the dissolution was not formalized until 29 December 1974. Rumors of a full-fledged reunion persisted throughout the 1970s, as the members occasionally reunited for collaboration, but never with all four simultaneously. Starr's I'm the Greatest, 1973, and Harrison's All Those Years Ago, 1981, are the only tracks that feature three ex-Beatles. After Lennon's murder in 1980, the surviving members reunited for the anthology project in 1994, using the unfinished Lennon demos, Free as a Bird and Real Love, as the basis for new songs recorded and released by the Beatles. During the 1970s, the band members occasionally collaborated, but never with all four Beatles simultaneously. In a 1971 interview, Lennon stated that he could not foresee working with McCartney again. However, maybe about a year or two after all the money things settled, we might have a dinner or forget about it. He was nonetheless willing to collaborate with Harrison and Starr. Harrison and Starr often performed on each other's records and separately on Lennon's. From the expression of protests against racism to songs stitched up from news reports and evoking common people in their music by talking about their names, hopes and hopelessness, their songs had the ability to speak to every man. Well before television ushered in the age of celebrity, the Beatles were rock stars. 50 years after their breakup, the Liverpool lads remain so. A BBC radio documentary on the quaint subject of the evolution of song fade-outs, made in 2010 by Stuart Maconie, paid tribute to how the Beatles revolutionised even that aspect of music. The 2-minute-long fade-out for Hey Jude in 1960 marked a complete break in how the ending of songs was to be imagined. A special issue of Life magazine last April, marking the Beatles' split half a century ago, offers a small window into why the band mattered. It describes how on their 1964 visit to New York, people ran through the street against traffic, past mounted policemen as they swarmed the Plaza Hotel, where the Beatles were still staying 3 days after their appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. The audience of 73 million for the show was not the only landmark. Fans watching the Beatles leave the Plaza included New York Catholic Archbishop Francis Cardinal Spellman, who had been born in the previous century. Hitting their prime 2 decades after the sun had set on the British Empire, it was the Beatles, after the English language and the BBC, who ended up opening doors for British culture the world over. When they were not touring, they kept office hours at the now tourist hotspot London's Abbey Road studio, industrially managed by producer George Martin and other technicians. In some exceptionally productive times, they could record up to 4 songs a day, 2 before the lunch hour break and 2 after. From 1962 to 1970, they did a whopping 210 songs, almost all recognizable decades on, complete with clear, sharp voices, complex music and lyrics. The jury is out on whether the lyrics would command an honor in the way Bob Dylan's could. Let It Be, 1970, an all-time hit, remains a world-class ballad for all times, but the Beatles never made the angst or dark side of the 1960s their primary preoccupation. They signaled concern on world events, but were original in what they had to say about it. The Beatles prospered right through the polarizing Cold War, 1947 to 1991, and their song Back in the USR, 1968, involved a cheerful shout-out to Ukraine girls who really knocked me out. There is also the runaway hit Revolution, 1968, which mellifluously invokes the ways of Chairman Mao. In an interview with GQ in 2018, Paul McCartney did mention Blackbird, 1968, as being his expression of protest against racism, but the Beatles were no exhorters to the marching public. The quality of their songwriting may not have literary flourishing, but whatever they did had the signature of freshness and elegance. A Day in the Life, 1967, was literally stitched up from reports picked from news dailies, so it had the ability to speak to every man. The way they invoked common people in their music, talking about their names, hopes and hopelessness, touched a chord. Paperback Writer, 1966, Dear Prudence, 1968, and Eleanor Rigby, 1966. Weeks would pass and their songs would be stuck on top of radio charts. In November 1963, at the Royal Variety Concert in London at the Prince of Wales Theatre, with the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret watching from the royal box, John Lennon urged those in the cheap seats to clap very loudly, and for the rest of you, will you please jangle your jewellery? The fact that they could get away with it, with their boyish charm and grins, only reflected the extent of the popular support they enjoyed. There is no such comforting tale about the Beatles. Perhaps they ruled the music scene for so long only because they parted close to their peak. John Lennon was murdered tragically in New York just 10 years after the split, but not before he had delivered legendary hits even by himself. George Harrison died in 2001. Paul McCartney remains the most visible connection to pop history's greatest band of the 20th century. 2 years ago, the reclusive Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney appeared together at a concert to wild cheers when McCartney presented his latest album, Egypt Station, to reasonable acclaim. What did they first perform together on July 14, 2019? Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967 of course. Many cultural movements of the 1960s were assisted or inspired by the Beatles. In Britain, their rise to national prominence signaled the youth-driven changes in post-war society with respect to social mobility, teenagers' commercial influence, and informality. They spearheaded the shift from American artists' global dominance of rock and roll to British acts, known in the US as the British Invasion. They inspired many young people to pursue music careers. From 1964 to 1970, the group had the top-selling US single 1 out of every 6 weeks, and the top-selling US album 1 out of every 3 weeks. In 1965, they were awarded MBEs, the first time such an honour was bestowed on a British pop act. A year later, Lennon controversially remarked that the band was more popular than Jesus now. The Beatles often incorporated classical elements, traditional pop forms, and unconventional recording techniques in innovative ways, especially with the albums Rubber Soul, 1965, Revolver, 1966, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967. Many of their advances in production, writing, and artistic presentation were soon widespread. Other cultural changes initiated by the group include the elevation of the album to become the dominant form of record consumption over singles, a wider interest in psychedelic drugs and Eastern spirituality, and several fashion trends. The band also pioneered with their record sleeves and music videos, as well as informed music styles such as jangle, folk rock, power pop, psychedelia, progressive rock, and heavy metal. By the end of the decade, the group was seen as an embodiment of the era's social-cultural movements, exemplified by the sentiment of their 1967 song, All You Need Is Love. Over the 1960s as a whole, the Beatles were the dominant youth-centered pop act on the sales charts. They broke numerous sales and attendance records, many of which they have or had maintained for decades, and continue to enjoy a canonized status unprecedented for popular musicians. Their songs are among the most recorded in history, with cover versions of Yesterday exceeding thousands. As of 2009, they were the best-selling band in history, with estimated sales of over 600 million records worldwide. Time included them in its list of the 20th century's 100 most important people. There you have it all, guys. Drop a thumb up in the comment section. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons if you've not done that, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The handles are in the description box below.